I think it's recording. Hey, if it is, hello, Dr. Little and BJ and whoever else is watching this. I've been meaning to make a recording since last summer when BJ told me you'd had a little issue with your health. And I saw a picture of you with your word search puzzle, which I still have a few of those around here. Mom loved working with those. I actually got her big word search puzzle book one Christmas. It was like a large size, was easier to see, and is really thick. And I knew she loved working with those, and she had a particular type she likes. So I gave that to her, and she looked at this book, and she said, "Oh my God, Larry, how long do you think I'm going to live?" So, um, so I've been playing with technology. This is kind of fun for me, and I'm not able to get my camera adjusted, so I don't know what the settings are looking like until I get done. So hopefully, it's not too painful to look at me. Dr. Little, I've been thinking about kind of my history with you. I graduated from community college, and after changing my degree like seven times, we had a guest speaker in a class, director of Parks and Recreation, and he made the comment. He goes, "I have the greatest job in the world. Every day I get to have an impact on the quality of people's lives." And I decided I wanted to study Parks and Recreation. Um, and it wasn't available in Kansas. I had enrolled in Fort Hays State and was just going to go the long route, go get a degree in PE and then go get a master's degree and go on. And out of the blue, I got an invite to come to Western and to go to Eastern at the same time for a track scholarship. So part of my memory of that trip is when I met you and met Dr. Fred, you kind of gave me the whole background of the department, the faculty, the competency, the class offerings, and the way that it was set up and what you did well. And you basically kind of laid out a plan for what was available and how Western could help me learn what I wanted to learn. And then when I went to Eastern, they just kept saying, "Oh, we're so much better than those guys. We're so much better than those guys." And that really rubbed me wrong because, I grew up in a culture of integrity where you just kind of stand up and take care of each other. So that's one of my first memories of us meeting is, sitting in your office and having you just kind of lay this out for me. The second memory that popped in as I started thinking about this, the javelin had been the focus of my life for like 6 or 7 years. And when I came to Western and being from, it's the first time I drove by myself, first time I'd ever traveled east of Salina, Kansas. Everything was new to me. It was a little bit overwhelming. I had a friend that drove with me to throw the discus for the track team. And I think he only stayed for 2 days. And it was so different, so uncomfortable for him, he packed up and went home. And I've often joked that if he would have waited 3 or 4 days, I might have gone with him. The other memory was when I had injured myself my senior year. I'd had a weird meet that had rained and then the mud had dried and they hadn't leveled the runway. And I had something pop on my elbow during a throw. And so I set up an appointment with an orthopedic surgeon to find out what's going on because I was really having trouble with the grip and whatever else. And I don't know if you remember this. I kind of forgot about it until I was flashing back. You went with me to that appointment to see that doctor. And I had no idea how important that was at the time because I still remember the doctor's words of telling me that I had torn something up in the tendons and ligaments and that I probably would never throw again. And you were there by my side at that time when here this dream that I had, and the year before I'd set the school record, made the world ranking in track and field news, qualified for the national championships, and this thing that I dedicated my life to all of a sudden was just kind of ripped away. And it meant an awful lot to me to know that you were there and just have your support at that time. The other thing, it seems like it's interesting. I'm going to show you a couple of slides here in a minute, some of the things that I've done. I didn't realize until many years later that it wasn't Parks and Recreation that I wanted to get involved with. What really appealed to me was this whole notion of being able to have an impact on the quality of people's lives. I've always done that in terms of health and fitness, in terms of, I think you were probably at the very first presentation I ever gave at the KPRS on positive attitude and motivation. And I always had that element in my classes of how can I help human beings grow and how can I challenge people to grow as human beings. And then after traveling around the United States for a while, interviewing people, I spent that year traveling and interviewing people because I wanted to know more about how do I help people learn how to learn. I felt like universities did a really great job of teaching people to memorize and getting them exposed to information. But I wanted to help people learn how to learn. And when I was in Cal State Northridge, thinking California would be a more progressive culture, it was worse. I had colleagues that were upset with me because I was inviting my students to think, to ask questions, to challenge me. And I had colleagues that came up to me and said things like, I can tell who's been in your class. And so at some point there, I knew that I had to leave, and I had no clue what I was going to do because I had a doctorate, and doctorate with degree and background in parks and recreation and education. But at the same time, I knew that I just had to go. And so one of the experiences I had before I came to Western, I was on the farm with mom and dad, and I had a phone call coming in, and I had to make a choice between Western and Eastern. And I kept going back and forth and back and forth, and my mind was just tearing me up. And I went out for a walk around the farm, and I was like sweating, and I was anxious. I was afraid I was going to make a mistake. And somewhere out walking around the trees in the orchard and so forth, I had just this clarity just kind of settled in on me. And the clarity was, if you go and you don't like it, you can always come back. If you don't go, well, you always wonder what you missed. And as soon as I realized that, just this calmness came in, and I knew what I was going to do, and I knew that I was going to go to Western. And what I didn't know was, my first time traveling on my own and leaving Kansas, that's when I really got exposed to the world. So for the last 35, 40 years, I've been very involved with growing myself, becoming more aware, being aware of what kind of role model I am, helping other people think and look at possibilities and dream bigger. And I remember having a conversation after my trip, before I went to Cal State Northridge, with a woman I met in Florida at a workshop. And we were having lunch together, and she asked me if you could do anything, Larry, because I had traveled for a year and was waiting for this big blinding flash of clarity to show up. Am I going to go work in wellness or holistic health, or what's going to show up? And it didn't. And so she asked me, if you could do absolutely anything, time, talent, money, training, educational background, none of that was an issue. And I gave her an answer, and she basically told me that was BS. So she's like, what would you really want to do? And I remember before I answered her, I kind of felt like I had to look over my shoulder so nobody would hear me because I was about to say something really outrageous. And I told her that I thought I'd like to get involved with corporate training someday. Well, fast forward, I walked away from the tenure track position at Cal State Northridge because I just couldn't, it wasn't working for me. I was too stressed all the time. And a couple of years later, I was in the right place at the right time, and I wound up getting a contract with my very first ever corporate client, and that happened to be IBM. And, I did 3 full days of creativity training with IBM, and I was so nervous and so anxious about it because I didn't have a corporate background. And then I realized not having a corporate background was one of the strengths that I had, that I didn't see things the way that they did. The second time I went back to Texas, I had 25, 30 people on the waiting list and people in the hallway asking to get into the class. And that kind of launched me into helping with the people part of business, which is what I've always been good at, really been inspired by. So a couple of things. I'm going to put a couple slides up here to play with. These are some of the things that I've tried to focus people on whenever I work with a company. I don't believe it's going to be really meaningful unless I can find a way for human beings to relate to what we're talking about and find a way for them to implement that in their life. Because if it's just information. So I've found ways to bring in ideas to help people, be more inspired, to be more reflective, to become more self-aware, to realize that there's different choices and options they have to make. So here's a couple of experiences that I've had. If I can. Okay, got a little timeout pause there. I think the video was too long. For some reason, YouTube wasn't accepting that today, so I just split it up. So I'm going to create a part 1 and part 2. It'll be about 17 minutes long total. So when I was looking back through this part, I realized one of the things I was working with a group of people up in Wyoming, um, and it was 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we were taking a break, and everybody was huddled in the back of the room talking with each other. And one of the people that I've gotten to know quite well over the years up there, he's a public information officer, came up to me in the front of the room and he looked at the back of the room and he said, "You see what's happening here? This is amazing." And I'm like, "What do you mean amazing?" And he said, "Well, by this time of the day, most of these guys are out in the parking lot having a cigarette, debating whether or not to leave early." And then he made an interesting comment to me and he's like, "You're the master of engaging people." And I realized that that's something I've learned as opposed to teaching. Before I left Cal State Northridge, I facilitated a workshop for faculty in my college, and it was on how teaching interferes with learning. Because teaching is about directing and learning is about engaging. And that's something I've studied and has really served me well as I feel like I'm facilitating workshops like this by inviting people to think, inviting them to feel, inviting them to relate, and inviting them to look for their own reactions. So I just wanted to add that little clip here. I'm going to pause this and hopefully everything's working well and I can get it brought over to the other side. Okay, let's see.